Thank you so much for the very warm introduction. Let me begin by thanking my very generous and gracious hosts, the Walowskis, who have hosted not only me, but they were brave enough to host all of my children and my whole family. And I'm just overwhelmed by their chesed. When I had the privilege to be in the home of their children in London, the only way I was able to describe Josh and Danielle's house was, it's like the house of Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu. And then I come to the Walowskis' house and I see where they got it from. So my bracha to them is that these traits should continue on for many generations in good health, and grandma should continue to reap the nachas from their illustrious family. I know how dear this organization is to them, especially to Sarah. This is really her heart and soul. And may they continue to see nachas from the peiros of this organization and all of the wonderful work that they do. Yeah, good. So I thank Rabbi Goldberg for inviting me tonight, and I'm really inspired by the amazing network of resources, shadchanim, community projects that Rabbi Goldberg has assembled and directs. And having seen some of the data over the last week, my only bracha to the Shidduch Center of Baltimore and to Rabbi Goldberg and to all the respective shadchanim is Yosef Hashem Aleichem Kachem Elef Pa'amim. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give you siyata d'shmaya to make many, many more shidduchim, build many batei neman b'Yisrael, l'shem l'teferes, ad bias goyel tzedek. Tonight I want to speak about one of the most prominent sages in the history of the Jewish people, someone who many do not know that much about, Rabbeinu Gershom. And he's given a very unusual appellation. He is called Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGoyla. Rabbeinu Gershom lived from 960. He was born in Metz in France, and he died in 1040 in Mainz in Germany. And he was one of the first, if not the first, of the Chachmei Ashkenaz. And it's important to understand what this means, because until Rabbeinu Gershom, the center of world Torah was in Bavel, was in Babylon, in the great academies of Sura and Pumbedisa. And in the times of Rabbeinu Gershom, he shifted the epicenter of Torah learning from Babylon to Germany. Rabbeinu Gershom is the author of one of the piyutim that we say in Ne'ilah on Yom HaKippurim. Zachar bris Avraham v'akedas Yitzchak v'hashev shvos ahalei Yaakov v'hoishienu l'man shemecha. That's Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom wrote the authoritative version of Talmud Bavli, which Rashi himself used in writing his commentary. And Rabbeinu Gershom was given a very unique appellation. We know some sages, they're given the title HaKadosh, the Holy One. For example, Rashi. Rashi is Rashi HaKadosh, the Alshich HaKadosh, the Rachayim HaKadosh. Some even say the Arizal HaKadosh. Others were given the title the Rebbe Reb. For instance, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, the Rebbe Rabbi Yonasan. Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg, the Rebbe Rav Shmelka. But nobody other than Rabbeinu Gershom was given the following title: Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGoyla. Look in Tosfos Samachem and Beis in Menachos. Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or Einei HaGoyla, the one who illuminated the exile. Why did Rabbeinu Gershom achieve this unique title more than anybody else in history? Well, we could say, as we mentioned before, he was the leader of Ashkenazic Jewry, and he moved the epicenter of Torah learning. So he sort of taught Torah to all the future of the Jewish people. But actually, there is a very deep message in this title, Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGoyla. Rabbeinu Gershom made many takanos. In fact, he made 90 takanos that were backed by his personal cherem. Some of them are well known, many are not. One of the well-known takanos of Rabbeinu Gershom, he forbid reading or opening the letters or the messages of somebody else. You see, survival of the Jewish commerce and merchants was dependent on confidentiality, and until Rabbeinu Gershom, people would eavesdrop and read other people's mail. And Rabbeinu Gershon put a cherem on anybody who would open someone else's letter. In fact, the letters were sealed. Beis, Ches, Daled, Reish, Gimel. Every letter had a stamp on it. Beis, Ches, Daled, Reish, Gimel, Becherem, Rabbeinu Gershon. Today in America, it's a federal crime to read someone else's mail. But it took hundreds and hundreds of years for the secular world to come around to the takana of Rabbeinu Gershon. But of all the takanas of Rabbeinu Gershon, two are considered the most well-known. The first one appears in Even Oezer, Siman Aleph Sif Yud, that a man cannot take more than one wife. The Shulchan Aruch writes, Rabbeinu Gershon hecherim al hanoisei al ishtai. You can't marry more than one wife. Takana number two, Rabbeinu Gershon was Masake and look in Even Oezer, Siman Kuf Yud Tes, that one cannot divorce their wife against their will. These are the two most well-known charamim of Rabbeinu Gershon. Now, what was the reason for them? It's interesting. There was a societal reason for these takanas of Rabbeinu Gershon. The church had a very negative view on marriage. In the ideal of the church, celibacy was the ideal. Monogamous marriage was considered a concession to the devil. Polygamy was downright immorality. So Rabbeinu Gershon, to protect the honor of the Jewish people, he didn't want us to seem less moral than the surrounding Gentiles. He forbid a man to marry more than one wife, and he forbid someone, well, if somebody's only going to marry one wife, Rabbeinu Gershon was concerned that divorce would increase, and therefore he decreed one cannot divorce against the will of the spouse. That's the simple reason for the charamim of Rabbeinu Gershon. But there's also a Kabbalistic, deep spiritual reason for these takanas of Rabbeinu Gershon. And this reason is offered by one of the great all-time Jewish thinkers, the Oistrovtzer, Rav Meir Yechiel of Oistrovtz, who lived from 1852 to 1928. Now this man was an ascetic man. For the last 40 years of his life, he did not eat, period, until the nighttime. By the end of his life, he had total organ failure, and he could only lay in bed. But he was a tzaddik nifla and a brilliant mind. And this is the idea that he advanced. The relationship that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with the Jewish people is compared in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, in the analogy of the relationship of a husband and a wife. God is the groom, and Knesset Yisrael is the bride. God is the chasan, and we are the kala. We're all familiar with that. We speak about it every Friday night. L'chadoidi l'kras kala pnei Shabbos nekabala. God is the chasan and we are the kala. But here's the bombshell. Not only is our relationship with God analogous to the relationship of a husband and a wife, but the relationship of a husband and wife reflects and affects our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is when there's peace and harmony in the home. When a husband and wife live be'ahava u've'achva b'shalom u'v'reyos, God is bound and tied to the Jewish people. But when there's discord in the home, and there's bickering in the home, and there's strife between husband and wife, then the relationship between God and the Jewish people is estranged at best and tenuous. Says the Oistrovtzer, as the Golus was progressing, and we are becoming more and more distant from God, there was a real danger. What if God says, hey, Jewish people, I will now banish you and divorce you against your will? That could happen, says the Oishas. So comes Rabbeinu Gershon, and he then ties the hands of God, so to speak. And he decrees that a man cannot divorce his wife against her will, because if we cannot divorce the Isha against her will, then God can never banish the Jewish people against our will. God's hands are tied, because the relationship of husband and wife reflects and affects the relationship between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? Sounds very good. Kudos to Rabbeinu Gershon. You saved our skin, Rabbeinu Gershon. But we're still not out of the woods. Because what if God says, okay, I'm stuck with the Jewish people, but I'm going to take another nation. Say, God says, I like those North Koreans. They're very cute, those North Koreans. So it will be the Jewish people and North Korea, or the Iranians. They're really lovely. So maybe God will say, okay, I'm stuck with the Klal Yisrael, but I'll take another wife, so to speak. So comes Rabbeinu Gershom, and he further ties the hands of God. And he says, not only can a man not divorce his wife against his will, a man cannot take another wife. So now, not only is God stuck with us forever, he's stuck only with us forever. And therefore, Rabbeinu Gershom earned the title, Ma'or HaGoyla. He's the light of the exile. He saved the Jewish people. Because of him, the bond between God and the Jewish people is tied forever. I am far from anything, certainly not a prophet. Is there any wonder why in the end of days we have a quote-unquote Shidduch crisis? You bet there's a Shidduch crisis. There's a crisis in the greatest and the ultimate Shidduch, namely between God and the Jewish people. Who's going to finally red this Shidduch? Who is going to consummate the deal and seal the deal? We've been waiting 3,300 years for this Shidduch to go to the chuppah already. We stood at Sinai, but it was never consummated. We went into Eretz Yisrael, we had a Beis HaMikdash, but it was only temporary. Who is going to seal the deal? So God reminds us, we need good shadchanim. What can we do to consummate the ultimate Shidduch? Every time we read a Shidduch, we support those who are ensuring that a young couple can finally meet. Anything we could do to support the efforts of those who are oisek b'shiduchim, that is the most direct way to influence the ultimate Shidduch, to influence the building of the ultimate house, to influence the building of the ultimate bayis, to be Meshadech Klal Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're here tonight to honor, to support the efforts of the Shidduch Center of Baltimore, who are really at the forefront, not only of bringing young men and women together to build their bayis b'nai Yisrael, but all of Klal Yisrael is dependent on them. Because through their efforts, as we're learning, the relationships of young men and women of Klal Yisrael reflect and affect the relationship HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with us. In the zechus of our coming together this evening, to try to build as many batei ne'eman b'Yisrael as possible, may this be a zechus that we hear the ultimate mazel tov, the shidduch of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Knesset Yisrael, Mehera Yishama Ba'arei Yehuda U'V'chutzos Yerushalayim Kol Sasain V'Kol Simcha. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and looking forward to seeing you. B'Yerushalayim Habaniyah. Thank you so much.